Hi, I'm Bridget Bittman. I'm the Public Information Coordinator for the Orland Park Public Library. Welcome to our library. We're located at 14921 Ravinia Avenue here in Orland Park. The library has a lot to offer. Our Youth Services Department is great for kids aged birth all the way up to 12. If you take a look at our preschool area, not only do we have a cool puppet show and train table, we also have a Lego table as well as iPads and other fun things for kids to do, not just books, including DVDs, Blu-rays of popular television shows as well as movies. And then, of course, there's lots of books. We've got all the greatest series, including Diary of a Wimpy Kid, and all the latest books that the kids are reading in school. The Orland Park Public Library is located at 14921 Ravinia Avenue. Our website is www.orlandparklibrary.org, and you can reach us by phone at 708-428-5100. The library offers great programs, both educational and entertaining, for kids, adults, and teens. We've got great programs for adults coming up in December. A barbershop quartet called The Convertibles is on the schedule, as well as Mark Dvorak, a folk singer. And of course, today on tap is Mark Twain, done by none other than Warren Brown, who's a Mark Twain historian and actor.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'd just like to greet everyone and say hello. Here we are at the beautiful Orland Park Library in the village of Orland Park, and it's an honor to be here this evening. It's beautiful outside. The lights attest to that. It's difficult to see during the daytime because it's now nighttime, of course. But I'm honored to be here, and we're going to cause a little trouble tonight. We'll have a good time. We'll talk about stories. We'll have a question and answer session, and I'll ask all the questions. But I'll always tell the truth to people who deserve it. Yeah, well, let's get started. Yeah. You know, I was going to say, I've heard an awful lot of good things spoken about me. I've had a lot of introductions, but most of them weren't true. I always thought after I heard the introduction, I could have said something that would be nicer and more impressive. Yeah, but I'll do the best that I can. Yeah, Milton is dead. Shakespeare's dead too. Yeah. And I'm not very well myself. I was born modest, but only in spots. And they've mostly worn away. That's true. Again, one of the few true things I'll say this evening. Well, how many of you have ever been to my boyhood birthplace in Florida? Yeah, Florida, Missouri. I like to tell that to people because it confuses them, having a birthplace with two state names. Now, my parents had the first crop of us kids in Tennessee. Missouri was a young state at the time and needed attractions. So they went there and had me. Worked out pretty good for all of us considering. There were 7 of us children, half boys. Half girls. Yeah, I was the 6th child, so I'm not sure what that makes me. Makes me wonder. That's what it does. How many of you think that's a true story? How many of you think it's not? How many aren't sure? I'm good. I still have some non-participants in the back, I can see. That's okay. I brought some pictures to share with you. Yeah. Now, it was in Florida. I lived there till I was about 4 and a half, and here's the picture of the house that I was born in. There were 8 of us living there. Kind of cozy, if you know what I mean. When I was about 4 and a half, we moved to Hannibal. Now, how many of you have been to Hannibal? A couple more, good. How many of you got into the Mark Twain cave? Anyone? All the stories I ever wrote about were true stories. They actually happened. And all the characters in my stories were real people. I just changed their names to protect the guilty. I was about 10 or 11. I went into the cave with Becky Thatcher. Now, that wasn't her real name. Her real name was Laura. But that's another story for another time with a much older audience. But I was in a large room inside that cave with Becky, and I told her those 3 words that every woman longs to hear. Becky, I'm lost. And I was, too. If it hadn't been for Becky, I'd have died in that cave just like Injun Joe. Of course, that wasn't really a true story either. He was really a nice man. But nobody wants to read about a villain who's a nice man. So I twisted the facts to spice up the story. I think it worked out pretty good, considering. Yeah. Now, here's a picture of the house that I lived in when I was in Hannibal. Now, my parents belonged to a clan with the town doctor, and I tell everyone that I drowned 7 times before I learned how to swim. Once in Bear Creek and 6 times in the Mississippi. Yeah, and for $25 a year, every time I drowned, the doctor would pump the water out of me. Then pump me full of air and send me on my way. I regretted that many times since then. I don't know if that'll... You sure? Anyone with a dry throat? Sometimes when I speak, it takes all the moisture out of the air. I'm not sure what causes that, but... Yeah. So... Yeah, he would pump me full of air and send me on my way. Now, there were boys whose parents didn't subscribe to that plan, and when they drowned, they stayed that way. Years later, I asked my mother if she wasn't concerned about me drowning as a boy. She said, not at all. A boy would never drown who was meant to be hanged. How many of you think that's true? Thank you. You're very kind. How many of you think not? How many aren't sure? There were too many kids, I can tell you that. And here's a picture of the cave. Now they have a sign over the door and they charge admission. The Mark Twain Cave. I recommend you go in at night. The prices are better. No one there except you. How many of you like to travel? Let me see. Show of hands. Good. How many of you don't like to travel? How did you get here tonight? You a magician? No? Anyone been to my home out in Hartford, Connecticut? I think maybe. Or seen it on television? 1 or 2. How many of you here have television? Just a couple. Okay, good. Yeah, it's a good reason to use your library. Here's a picture of my home out in Hartford. It looks a little like something. Anyone want to take a guess? A riverboat, exactly. A steamboat, specifically. It's known as Steamboat Gothic. I had the house built this way in 1873, and we moved in a year later, my wife Livia and I. This house has 5 indoor bathrooms. I noticed, quite the thing of its day, even by today's standards. And I noticed when Livia and I moved in, we had $300 left in our savings account at the bank. I told Livia it was on account of the fact that the plumber didn't know about it. Don't have any plumbers there, do we, tonight? I always forget to ask until it's too late. Here's a picture of my family. My wife, Livia, and my 3 daughters, Susie and Jean and Clara, sitting on the veranda or the front porch. Yeah. Our dog, Hash, and I'm the one with a cigar in his mouth. How many of you knew that I was also a famous artist besides being a great writer? Anyone? We have any artists here this evening? No competition? Good. Yeah. I brought my favorite drawing to share with you. Hope you enjoy it. Are you familiar with that long, skinny dog, the one that's low to the ground? The dachshund, yeah. What's the other name for it? The wiener dog? Yeah. Isn't that a beauty? What's so funny? Doesn't have a front half? Yeah, well, I said that I was a good artist, not a fast one. And the dog had turned the corner of the wall before I could draw the front half. That's true. We're not going to vote on that one. I don't think anyway. I usually don't think at all. That's the truth. Anyone been to Bermuda here? Good, a couple of you. How many of you know where it is? Bermuda. Good. Well, I used to like to go to Bermuda, and usually it's pretty wavy there out in the ocean, isn't it? Well, I went there with my good friend, the Reverend Joe Twitchell, on a few occasions. And when we were there, the water was calm, as if something unusual or mysterious was going to occur. I think they knew I was there. The first time I was there, I lost my triangle. One of those musical...
Okay.
That's not true. Yeah, I knew you would. I just had to wait a little longer than usual. Well, when I was there, they didn't have any radios or telephones. No cables. Yeah, no street fights and no murders, Donna. By the way, it was calm and peaceful till I arrived. Yeah. And the sand was so clean it squeaked underneath our feet as we walked on the beach. And it was the most beautiful day. We were out on the beach, and the sky was the most beautiful shade of light blue, and there were one or two white tufted clouds against the background of the blue. And I remarked to Reverend Joe, I said, "Joe, isn't this heavenly?" He said, "Yes, it is. Take a good look." Not sure what he meant by that. I'm sure it will come to me. I once asked Joe if, when I died, he thought I should be cremated. He said, "Where you're going, I don't think there's any doubt." Not sure what he meant by that either. How many of you think that's true? Thank you. Thank you very much. Very kind of you. How many of you think it's not? Thank you. How many aren't sure? Good. That's how I like it. Pretty mixed up. Anyone been to Havana in Cuba? They have some other places. They have one in Illinois on the Illinois River. And this one is in Cuba. Anyone ever been there? One person, thank you. Anyone ever heard of Cuba? A couple more, good. How many of you like museums? I'm sure a lot of you, good. Well, they have a museum there in Havana. Did you get to the museum while you were there?
Cigar factory was the only place
we had a lot of those everywhere. Now they don't have them anywhere anymore, but yeah, I smoked a lot of cigars, but that's another story. So anyway, in the museum, they had the most curious things in this museum. Yeah. Now, it wasn't very large. You're going to have to follow me a little because I'm going to walk. Is that okay? Yeah. It was from about the table to the front of these chairs and up to the back of that table, about 20 feet square. Maybe a little smaller. Maybe this much. Yeah. I'm sure of it. But they had 2 skulls of Christopher Columbus. One when he was a boy. The other when he was a man. I was going to buy them for my home in Hartford. But my wife Libby said I had enough of that stuff already. How many of you think that's true? Shame on you, Bruce. 2 skulls of Christopher Columbus? I don't think so. Now, the last time I was in Hannibal was in 1902. I was on my way to receive an honorary degree from the University of Missouri. And when I arrived, I saw a fellow I hadn't seen in many years. I said, "How's your wife?" He said, "I haven't spoken to her in 15 years. I said, "That's horrible. How do you account for such a thing?" He said, "Well, I didn't want to interrupt her." How many of you think that's true? How many not? Yeah, you had to vote that way, you know, Bruce. April's already given you some looks. Yeah, I don't think it was true, but it ought to be. I think it's only fair, though. First we had the cave, and then we had that one. It makes it kind of balanced. Us fellows were standing in a hotel room, and we were talking about, did I tell you I was on my way to get an honorary degree?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I wasn't sure I had. I forgot where I was in my story.
1902. 1902.
That wasn't what was important. But I'm glad you remembered anyway. You wrote it down? Wow. Are you a reporter?
Yes.
Wonderful.
I'm not a reporter.
You lied to me? Well, you know, and I just went right in on that one, didn't I? Hook, line, and sinker. Yeah. Well, anyway, as I was saying, us fellows were standing in a hotel room, and we were talking about presents. Now, mind you, we weren't talking about the kind of presents that you wrap and you put the items in a box and put bows and ribbons on that you give to people. We were talking about the presence of mind. And I remarked that nobody I knew had any. Except for me, of course. Now, how many of you here have presence of mind, or common sense as it's otherwise known? I'm sure most of you do. Show of hands, how many of you have it? How many of you know you don't have it? Mark, are you raising your hand or just scratching? Okay. How many aren't sure? You're still evaluating. Thank you. Okay, a couple. Good. That's a good place to be, evaluating. I should have spent more time evaluating. Well, we were talking, as I was saying, and all of a sudden there was a great deal of commotion going on outside the building. And we all went out to look. And across the street there was a 4-story hotel that was on fire. And leaning out of the window on the 4th floor, there was a man screaming for his life. We all looked at him, but nobody knew what to do. They didn't have the presence of mind. That is, of course, except for me, as I mentioned. You're going to write this down, or you're going to remember this? Okay. Now, mind you, they didn't have the ladders like they have today that go all the way to the heavens. They only went as high as a 2nd-story window. So I hollered for a rope. And a fellow brought me the rope, and I took the end of it, and I threw it to that man and told him to catch it, which he did. And then I told him to tie it around his waist, which he proceeded to do. And then I pulled him down. He made quite a crash. But he at least had a fighting chance. How many of you think that's true? Shame on you. Always obey your parents when they are present. Never sass old people unless they sass you first. This is one of my favorite. It's better to take what does not belong to you than to leave it lying around neglected. Some of you may identify with this one. It's better to keep your mouth shut and appear stupid than to open your mouth and remove all doubt. They say the first third of life is a good time, and the rest is remembering it. Life is a fleeting show, as the saying goes, and we all have to go sometime sooner or later. To go with a clean slate is the main thing. Fact of the matter is, it's the only thing worth striving for. It's life. And like soap bubbles, we're blown upon the world. We float buoyantly, and then we vanish with a puff. Thanks for joining me this evening. You were a wonderful audience. Thank you.